There is a particular kind of cruelty that doesn't require darkness to operate. It doesn't need back alleys or closed rooms. It prefers the open air, a crowded restaurant, fluorescent light, an audience of strangers who have collectively decided that looking away is the same as being innocent. Nadia Ferreira had been on her feet for 9 hours when Table 14 ordered their 4th round of appetizers and their 1st round of opinions about her body. She was 28 years old, 5 feet 4, and 250 pounds of Cape Verdean Portuguese South Boston woman who had been waitressing at Carbone's on Hanover Street for 3 years, long enough to know which tables to watch and which customers came in looking for a reason. She had strong hands and a memory for orders that never required a notepad and a laugh that, when it was genuine, made the room feel warmer. She had worked every shift available for 4 months since her younger brother's car accident, covering his medical bills with the particular ferocious quiet of a woman who has no time to be defeated. She did not have time for Table 14 either, but Table 14 had time for her. There were 4 of them, the kind of men who were recently successful in some way they couldn't stop reminding the room of loud voices, expensive watches worn with too much self-awareness, the particular entitlement of people who have confused money with permission. They had been at the table for 2 hours. They had sent back a pasta dish for reasons Nadia suspected had nothing to do with the pasta. They had called her sweetheart 3 times, and she had smiled the smile she kept for people like this, the one that was professionalism with nothing behind it, and she had taken their orders and brought their food and done her job. Then the one in the center, the one with the Rolex and the voice designed to carry, said something that was not a question and not a joke and not anything except what it was. He said it loud enough for the adjacent tables to hear. He said it while gesturing at her with a breadstick, which was a detail Nadia would remember later with a specific clarity, the absurdity of the breadstick. He said, "How do they let someone your size carry plates in a restaurant like this? Must be a liability. She probably eats more than she serves." The table laughed. Not all of it. 2 of them laughed. One looked at his phone. One looked away. The room around them went the specific quiet of people who have heard something happen and haven't decided yet what to do with it. That particular held breath of a crowd that is somewhere between uncomfortable witness and complicit audience, each person waiting to see what direction the room decides to go before committing to a position. Nadia had seen this look before. She had seen it since she was 12 years old, and a boy at school had said something about her size in front of a class full of people who had gone exactly this quiet. She had seen it on buses, in stores, in restaurants she'd worked at before this one, and restaurants she'd been a customer in. She knew the quality of that held-breath silence. She knew that most people resolved it by deciding that looking away counted as something, as decency, as non-participation, as the acceptable middle ground between cruelty and courage. She stood at the edge of Table 14 with a tray and did not move for 1 breath. 2. 3. The smile had left her face, and what was underneath it was not tears. She had cried over things like this, privately, on her own time, in the car after shifts sometimes, and she had decided some time ago that she would not do it in front of people like this, not because she was ashamed of it, but because it was hers, but something older and more tired and very controlled. She opened her mouth. She did not get the chance to use it. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Now let's go. The man who stood up from the corner table was not someone most people in the restaurant had noticed when he came in. This was intentional. Matteo Greco was 43 years old and ran the most disciplined criminal organization in New England from an office that looked, to everyone who didn't know better, like a private wealth management firm in the Back Bay. He had been eating at Carbone's on the first Thursday of every month for 7 years. Always the same corner table, always the same order, the rigatoni, the branzino, a glass of Barolo he nursed through the meal without hurrying. He came alone or with one man, and he wore suits that were very good and very understated, and he had the particular invisible quality of extremely powerful men who have learned that being seen is a choice. He had noticed table 14 when they came in. He noticed everything. He had catalogued them in the first 2 minutes, loud, performative, the Rolex a size too large, and filed them in the category of things that did not require his further attention. Then, the one in the center had opened his mouth. Matteo had heard it. The whole room had heard it. He had watched Nadia stand at the edge of the table with the tray and not move, and he had watched her face with the assessing attention he gave everything. And what he saw in those 2 seconds before he made his decision was not a woman about to cry. It was a woman about to say something she would pay for with her job in a restaurant where the margins were tight enough that the owner would not want the complication. He stood up. He was not a large man in the way that announces itself, not the theatrical broadness of men who want you to know they're dangerous. He was simply someone around whom the air changed quality when he moved through it. And the room felt this before anyone consciously registered it, the way a room feels a change in pressure before it hears thunder. The conversations nearest to him paused, without knowing why. 2 men near the bar turned to look without being able to say what had caught their eye. He walked from the corner to table 14 at a pace that was unhurried and completely without hesitation, and he came to a stop beside Nadia, and he did not look at her yet. He looked at the table. The man with the Rolex looked up. Matteo looked at him for a moment without saying anything. This was a technique he had refined over 20 years, and it worked on everyone. The waiting, the specific wait of being looked at by someone who is taking their time, whose time you cannot buy. The man with the Rolex produced a social smile, the kind people make when they're not certain of the stakes. "We're just having a conversation," he said. "I know what you were having," Matteo said. His voice was quiet enough that only the table and Nadia could hear it clearly, and that was also intentional. He did not perform for rooms. He found it unnecessary. His voice was Boston by way of Sicily, flat, precise, carrying the specific weight of a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. You're going to want to choose your next sentence carefully. The man with the Rolex assessed him the way men like that do, looking for the visible markers, the cues. The suit said money. The stillness said something else. Something the Rolex man didn't have a clean category for, and that absence of category was what made him hesitate. "I didn't catch your name," the Rolex man said. "No," Matteo said. "You didn't." A pause. "Listen," the man said, with the recovering tone of someone trying to regain footing. "We're customers here. Whatever the issue is." "The issue," Matteo said, with the patience of someone explaining something to a person who would benefit from listening carefully, "is that you said something to this woman in front of a room full of people, and you said it to be cruel, and you said it because you've spent your whole life believing that the way a person looks is an invitation to commentary." He paused. "It isn't." The table was very quiet. The adjacent tables had stopped pretending not to listen. The man with the Rolex did the thing that men like him do when they're cornered and don't understand how it happened. He reached for volume. "Do you know who I—" "Yes," Matteo said. His voice did not change at all. The absolute evenness of it was the most frightening thing in the room, and some part of the restaurant understood this. "Marcus Devaney. You run a mid-size property development firm in the seaport. You closed on 2 residential projects last year that came in significantly under the projections you promised your investors." He paused. "I know a great many things about you, Mr. Devaney. None of them are as interesting as you appear to believe." The color left Marcus Devaney's face in stages. Matteo turned to Nadia. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. Not gratitude, exactly. Not the overwhelmed relief of someone who has been rescued. Something more complicated. She was a woman who was used to handling things, and he had stepped in front of something she'd been about to handle herself, and she knew it, and she wasn't certain how she felt about it. He could see all of this in approximately 2 seconds. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, and he said it with a directness that acknowledged exactly what she was thinking. "May I ask your name?" "Nadia," she said, after a moment. "Nadia." He nodded slightly, the way a person nods when they're noting something. "I'm going to sit back down." He looked back at the table. These gentlemen are going to apologize to you, and then they're going to call for their check, and they're going to leave. He said it the way he said most things, without volume, without theatre, as a statement of what would occur. Marcus Devaney looked at him for one more moment. There was a thing happening behind his eyes that Matteo had seen many times. The recalculation, the rapid downward revision of what had seemed 30 seconds ago like a safe set of assumptions. He had come in here tonight as the loudest man in the room. He was leaving as something considerably smaller. He looked at Nadia, and the look on his face was the look of a man who has done the calculation and arrived at an answer he doesn't like. "I apologize," he said, "and it was not gracious, and it was not sufficient, and they all knew it, but it was said in front of the room, and the room heard it. The one beside him who had laughed said it too, faster, quieter, looking at the tablecloth. The third one, the one who had looked away, said nothing, which was its own answer. Matteo looked at all of them for one final moment. Then he turned and walked back to his corner, unhurried, the way he'd come. He sat down. He picked up his glass of Barolo. The room around him slowly returned to its own volume, the way a room does after something has passed through it. He did not look over at table 14. He knew without looking that they were calling for the check. He looked at his rigatoni. After 7 minutes, Nadia came to his table. He looked up. She stood in front of him with her tray at her side and her posture very straight and her expression composed, and she said, "You didn't have to do that." "No," he agreed. "I was about to handle it." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry for getting in front of it." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "How did you know his name?" He considered her. Sharp, he thought. Most people, in the aftermath of what had just happened, were still inside the emotional weather of it. She had already moved past it and was asking the more interesting question. "I know a great many people's names," he said. She studied him with the particular calm of a woman who has spent years reading rooms and knows when she's looking at something that doesn't fit any category she has. Then she said, "Can I get you anything else?" "Just the check," he said, "when you have a moment." She nodded and moved away, and he watched her go, the straight back, the unhurried walk of a woman who had just been humiliated in front of a restaurant and was not going to let it change the way she carried herself. And he felt something that he filed privately in a category he didn't examine very often. He left a tip that was larger than the bill. He came back the following Thursday. And the Thursday after that, the third Thursday, she brought his rigatoni and set it down and said without preamble, "You've been coming here 7 years. Same table, same order, same night." He looked up. "How do you know I've been coming 7 years?" "Marco in the kitchen told me," she said. "After last month I asked about you." He studied her. "What did Marco tell you?" "That you always tip well and you never make trouble and you come alone or with one quiet man and you never check your phone at the table." She paused. "He also said your name is Matteo Greco and that she should make sure your water glass is never empty. And she said it with the particular emphasis of a person quoting someone who meant something specific by it." He was quiet for a moment, and knowing that, he said, "You still came over to ask questions." She looked at him with those steady eyes. "Mr. Greco, I grew up in South Boston. My father drove for people for 18 years. I know who comes in and sits in corners and knows things they shouldn't about property developers." She paused. "I'm not afraid of complicated." He looked at her for a long moment. The restaurant moved around them, the low light, the murmur of other tables, the sound of the kitchen. She stood at the edge of his table with her tray and looked back at him with the complete, even steadiness that he was beginning to understand was simply her baseline, and said nothing further, and waited. He picked up his fork. "Why did you ask Marco about me?" She considered this. "Because you did something that cost you something," she said, "and you didn't do it to make an impression. You did it because it was the right thing, and you were in the room, and it was available to you." She paused. "That's not nothing. I wanted to know who that was." He held her gaze. "And now you know. Enough to know there's more to know," she said. She picked up her tray. "Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Greco." She moved away. He watched her go again. He stayed later than usual that night. Over the weeks that followed, he developed a vocabulary for her. The way you develop a vocabulary for something you find yourself returning to and wanting to describe accurately. The thing about Nadia Ferreira that he would understand gradually over those weeks was that she was not a woman who softened herself for rooms. She had been softened at Thai. That was a different thing. She had been on the receiving end of a particular kind of pressure that the world applies to bodies like hers, an ongoing low-grade campaign to make her smaller in every sense, to have her apologize for the space she occupied and adjust downward the room she took up and treat her own presence as a thing that required managing. She had felt this pressure since she was 12 years old, and she had refused it consistently, not with performance or defiance, but with the particular stubborn warmth of a woman who had decided that who she was required no justification. The result was a person who moved through rooms like she had a right to be in them, who laughed when something was funny without covering her mouth, who disagreed with you directly and without venom when she disagreed, who said I don't know when she didn't know, and I think you're wrong when she thought you were wrong, and who sat in a chair as if the chair had been designed specifically for the accommodating of her particular self. Matteo Greco had spent his adult life surrounded by people who performed. It was the condition of the world he moved in, everyone performing loyalty or competence or harmlessness or menace, all of it calibrated to what they needed or feared from him. He had become very good at seeing past the performance to the thing underneath, which was usually simpler and less interesting than the performance suggested. Nadia Ferreira was not performing. She was just there, entirely there, in the specific, honest way of a person who has made peace with exactly who she is and finds the alternative tiresome. He found this, he would admit only to himself, somewhat extraordinary. They had dinner the following month. Not at Carbone's, at a place in the South End that she recommended, smaller, noisier, where the food was the point, and the lighting was the lighting, and nobody was performing atmosphere. She had recommended it without asking him what kind of place he preferred, which he suspected was a test of some kind, which he had passed by simply agreeing without qualifications. She ordered without looking at the menu, which meant she'd been here before and knew what she wanted, and she ate without apology, fully, with enjoyment, talking with the bread in her hand and gesturing with her fork when something was interesting and setting things down to laugh properly when something was funny. She ate without the self-conscious monitoring he had seen women perform in this context his entire adult life, the careful portions, the commented-upon restraint, the performance of not wanting too much. She ate like a person who liked food and had decided long ago that this was not a fact about herself that required management or apology or the ongoing permission of whoever was seated across from her. He found himself watching her across the table and thinking that this was what it looked like when someone was simply free. Not free from anything in particular, just free. The baseline freedom of a person who has stopped waiting for the world to tell them it's okay to take up space. He had not seen this in a very long time. He was not entirely certain he had ever sat across a dinner table from it. She told him about her brother. The accident, a wet night on the expressway, a driver who ran the light, the 6 surgeries, the 8 months of recovery that had stretched into a year, the shifts she had worked to cover the bills, the way she had reorganized her entire life around his healing with the same quiet thoroughness she brought to everything. She told it without self-pity, factually, in the specific matter-of-fact voice of someone reporting something that happened rather than performing the having survived it gua. And in the telling, he understood something about her that clarified a great many other things, that this was a woman for whom love was a verb, and she conjugated it in action rather than declaration, and the action was whatever was required, for as long as it was required, without complaint. He told her, in turn, more than he had told anyone in a dinner conversation in years, not operational things, those he kept in their category, sealed and separate, which she seemed to understand without it needing to be said. He told her about his mother, who had run a restaurant in the North End for 30 years and had opinions about rigatoni that would have gotten her thrown out of most kitchens in the city. He told her about the Thursday habit, the same table, the same order, which had started after his mother died as a way of sitting in the specific quality of that restaurant's light for 1 hour a month and not thinking about anything. She listened to this without filling the space, which he noticed, because filling space was what most people did when they were nervous. And she was not nervous. "What is it about that light?" she asked after he'd finished. He thought about it. "My mother always said restaurants should feel like permission," he said. "To sit down, to take your time, to be somewhere that's taken the trouble to make itself good for you." He paused. "That restaurant takes the trouble." Nadia looked at him for a moment. "That's exactly what good restaurants are supposed to do," she said. "Permission." She nodded slightly as if filing it. "I'm going to think about that every shift from now on." He looked at her across the table. She was wearing a dark red dress and her hair was down, loose around her shoulders, and she was eating the last of her pasta without hurrying, and she was the most uncomplicated person he had sat across from in as long as he could remember, and he was aware that uncomplicated was not the right word. She was deeply complicated, all of it visible, nothing hidden, which was the rarest kind of complicated there was. He drove her home. The drive was South Boston at night. The city moving past the windows in the particular way it moves when you are inside something and the world outside is simply weather. She did not fill the silence with conversation, which he noted. She looked out the window, and he drove, and it was the most comfortable car ride he had had in longer than he could account for. Outside her building in Southie, she turned in the passenger seat and looked at him and said, "I know what the world you live in is." She said it clearly, without preamble. "I'm not going to pretend I don't. My father drove for people for 18 years and I watched what it cost him and what it gave him, and I understand the structure." He looked at her. "And?" "And I'm not afraid of it," she said. "But I'm not a woman who walks into things without knowing what I'm walking into. So I'm telling you that I know. So we can both stop pretending I don't." He studied her for a long moment. She held the look without wavering, which he had come to expect. "The thing I can tell you," he said, "is that no one who is mine has ever been hurt for being mine." He paused. "I am very careful about that." She nodded slowly. "I believe you." "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She got out of the car. At the door of her building, she turned back once and looked at him. And there was something in the look that was not a goodbye, just a pause. A woman noting something she intended to return to. He watched her go until the door closed behind her, and he sat there for a long moment in the dark car on the South Boston street with the engine running and the city quiet around him. And he did not examine what was happening in his chest with too much precision, because it was new, and he had learned long ago that new things were best treated gently, given room, allowed to become what they were going to become without being named too soon and risk becoming only the name. His driver, who had been silent through all of this, said nothing. Matteo looked at the closed door. "Take me home," he said. They drove. The following Thursday he came to Carbone's at his usual time. Nadia came to the corner table without being waved over and set down the Barolo without him ordering it, and said, in the brisk, professional voice she used for everything that was not their conversation, "Rigatoni tonight, or are we branching out?" He looked up at her. The restaurant light fell across the round warmth of her face, the dark, loose hair, the easy way she held herself, the complete absence of apology in the way she stood in the room, in his room, in the particular light that his mother had said was permission. "Rigatoni," he said. She wrote it down, looked up. Something moved in her expression that was not the professional voice, something warmer, quieter, an acknowledgement that passed between them in the second before she turned back to the floor. He picked up his Barolo. Outside on Hanover Street, the North End did what it always did, carried on in Italian and English and the particular music of a neighborhood that had been feeding people for 100 years. Inside, a woman who had been humiliated in this room a month ago moved through it like she owned it, because she had decided long ago that rooms did not get to determine whether she belonged in them. She was right about that, and the most dangerous man in New England sat in his corner with his wine and watched her work, and understood, with the quiet certainty of a man who had built an empire on knowing what had value and what did not, that he had been sitting in this restaurant for 7 years, waiting for the thing that made the light worth coming back for. He had just needed someone cruel enough to show him what it was. And he found, sitting in his corner with the Barolo and the light and the particular warmth that the room had when she was working in it, that he was not even angry at Marcus Devaney for that. Some things required a catalyst. Some lights required a specific darkness to make them visible. He would not thank the man. But he would not forget what the man had inadvertently given him. If this story left something in your chest, if Nadia standing at that table, not flinching, not breaking, moved you somewhere real, you are not alone. The people who refuse to be made small by small people are the ones the room remembers. They always have been. Hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss a story, and drop a comment below. The moment Matteo stood up from that corner table, what did you feel?